So we're going to be thinking about how to do unseen poetry exams today, and I've developed a 7-step process for how to tackle any unseen poetry or prose question. Prose is when you have an extract from a text. Poetry is usually a full poem. So step 1 is going to be understanding the question, exploring the keywords of the question. Then we're going to try and get a general impression of what is the poem about. We're going to think about themes and messages. We're going to underline relevant sections of the poem and then maybe explore a little bit about language and structure as well. Then plan and write and edit. So plan, write, edit. I'll probably just get to the point where we plan in this lesson just to show you the process. But yeah, you can feel free to go ahead and write your own answer and edit your own answer as well on the same question if you feel like that's going to be helpful for you. So yeah, this poem, unfortunately, I have actually seen it before, so I do know it, slightly cheating. It's a beautiful poem by Elizabeth Bishop called One Art. I'm not going to read the poem aloud or show it you for too long because it's in copyright, I think. So just have a look at the poem yourself and use it for this particular question. I'm just going to take the question itself and just put it here so that we work on it on this page. The question is, how does the speaker convey their feelings about the subject of loss? The keywords are speaker, feelings, and loss. Loss is the focus of the question, so that's the most important word. It tells us the theme. So yeah, loss. I might think about different ways that that word can apply. So you might lose items, you might lose time, you might lose people, you might lose parts of yourself even. There's different ways that you could take that theme. And then I'm going to apply it to the poem. So I'm going to pause and copy across any of the quotes that I would underline. In your own time, I want you to have a look at this same poem, One Art by Elizabeth Bishop, and try and do your own analysis of it. So do your own annotations and explorations. And then when you're ready, you can unpause me and we'll come back to the lesson and you'll see my notes here as well. So we'll do that now. Yeah, so these are my notes. I've pulled the quotes that I would use, and I've also just made a couple short notes about different techniques that I would use to analyze these quotes in a bit more detail. I've also thought about my own interpretation or my own opinion of the speaker's feelings here. So at the beginning, there's a confident tone. She's sure that it's no disaster to lose things. It's fine. You can just go through life losing things, and sometimes things seem to even want to be lost. And then it gets faster over your life. You lose further, you lose faster, you lose more things. So the pace of the poem in the center starts speeding up and it gets a little bit more kind of manic or intense at that point. The things that she starts losing also get larger. So instead of it being door keys and an hour, it's houses and cities and realms. And then eventually the final stanza reveals the true meaning of the poem. So we might call this a volta, a turning point in the poem as well. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love. It seems like losing the person is actually what the whole poem was supposed to be about, but it took the speaker a while to build into this idea, like it was a painful loss. It was maybe more important of a loss than anything else that she lost. And at that point, the structure breaks down. So instead of this kind of very strict repetition you can feel through the lines of the poem, we suddenly get the art of losing's not too hard to master. Instead of is not hard to master, it's not too hard. And though it may look like, write it like disaster, almost as if she can't quite bear to write that word disaster when she tries to think about the person that she's lost. So there's a sense of control versus chaos here. There's order and chaos because it's sort of chaotic, randomly losing things that you didn't mean to lose. And the structure of the poem is what we call a villanelle. You don't necessarily need to know this to write a good essay on it, but if you do know it, it kind of helps you. The form, sorry, can't spell villanelle. There we go. The form's a villanelle, so that's a very controlled poetic form, and she actually breaks the rules of the villanelle at the end because she says it's not too hard. She's not directly repeating the villanelle structure. So even if you didn't know that word villanelle, you can still notice the way that the strict repetition at the beginning degenerates into a partial repetition at the end, and that shows her emotions kind of breaking through, almost like the poem is actually to herself to try and convince herself that it's okay that she lost this person. So there's a lot of sense of restraint here, but also emotions kind of breaking through the restraint. There's also this feeling of kind of light-hearted, whimsical attitude to life, where she is just kind of happy to breeze through life, losing things. Doesn't matter if she loses her keys or even her houses or even the countries where she lives as she moves around. The thing that really matters, that seems to be difficult, is the person that she lost, even losing you. You is direct address as well, so you makes it personal, but we realize that the poem is personal right in the final stanza. So again, that's a volta, a turning point. So these are my notes and thoughts on the poem. Hopefully you had similar ideas, similar thoughts, and this poem actually is very strict with its structure. So a lot of this analysis is structural. Sometimes with your analysis, the poem might be more linguistic and language based, so you might have more things like, metaphors, simile, etc., rather than sentence type or repetition, which is more of a structure point. So you can just kind of use the points, the techniques that feel natural and right for that poem. So yeah, I'll just show you how I would turn this into a plan then. So I always plan 1, 2, 3, and then maybe 4 if I've got time. So 4 topics. These are my middle paragraphs. And then at the end, I plan the thesis. The thesis is the thing that comes in the intro, but I find it easier to plan that after you've done your individual points. So I personally prefer this type of plan, even though when you actually write the essay, the thesis is going to be in the intros, like the first thing that you write. So we plan, 3 to 4 topics here. So the question can convey their feelings about the subject of loss. So the easiest way to structure this is to do 3 to 4 different feelings. So we might have, at first, the speaker seems maybe exhilarated by the feeling of loss. Again, I'm not the best at spelling. They seem kind of excited by it. In some ways, it's kind of fun or exciting. It's not, it's not emotional. It's not kind of like deep or intense. Sometimes losing larger aspects of one's life can feel a little intense for her, or more difficult. So during the center of the poem, it gets more difficult. Finally, losing people is the hardest of all for her. She seems to struggle with emotional restraint when she thinks of the loved one that she lost. And then in this case, I think probably I don't need a paragraph 4 because I feel like that all covers the poem well. If I had more points, I would maybe put a paragraph 4 there. So these are the topic sentences that I've planned. These are the 3 points that are going to start off each of my middle paragraphs. So the first one is, it feels fine. The second one is, it starts to feel a bit intense. Finally, it actually feels kind of out of control when she thinks about certain things that she's lost. The thesis needs to tie all of these together, so I'm going to think about how can you do that now. Yeah, so let's think. Yeah, so I actually ended up, normally with a thesis, you would just kind of write like one sentence, like this is my actual thesis. But sometimes I feel like when I'm writing, it takes me a little while to get to that point. So I'll either write a sentence and then delete it and rewrite it a few times, or I'll do what I did here, which is kind of basically write the whole intro. And the intro kind of builds down into my thesis, which is the main argument. So the main thing to remember with your thesis is that this is your main argument, your answer to the question. It's one sentence and it kind of covers the main message or opinion about the question. So I could just delete all of this and that would be my thesis. But actually I quite like those sentences that I kind of use to build into the thesis. So if this was me writing this exam, that would just be my intro, like a 3-sentence intro that finalizes or kind of finishes in this thesis. And then, from that you would, so if I show you kind of how the essay would start, it would have those, middle paragraph plans at the beginning of each paragraph. Then it would go into evidence, then it would go into analysis, and so on. So my intro would be this whole thing with the bold bit being the thesis. The thesis should always come right at the end of your intro, but your intro itself can have more than one sentence in it. It can have a few. And then it'd have paragraph 1 plus evidence analysis, paragraph 2, and so on. Then a little conclusion. You don't need to plan the conclusion because you can just summarize the points that you've already made. The conclusion should never introduce anything new anyway, so it's good to not plan the conclusion. So you can see from start to finish how we would do an unseen poetry question, and it's really not too hard. It can be difficult to get to a point where you're this confident with your interpretations. That just means you need to practice more. So when I started doing questions, there's no way I could do it this fast or this confidently. Now, because I've planned and written and marked and taught a million essays on a million questions, and I've read so many poems, it's not hard for me to do this. It's very simple. It looks simple. It might seem hard if you're trying to do this at first, but that just means you need to practice a bit more. So I'm going to go back to the 7-step process of how that works. Hopefully this has been really useful for you and you're feeling confident on Unseen Poetry. If you're still really stressed, just read loads of poems first, get used to poems, get your own personal connection with poetry, and then go from there and start trying to write some of these questions. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. Hopefully this has been helpful for you, and I'll see you guys soon in a future lesson. Bye for now.